Bad idea. Listen, I was in the legislature and voted against it, and quite frankly, it's a situation that doesn't serve Ontario well. One of the big problems we have in our economy is that we've lost the ability ourselves to make decisions about what happens in that economy, because the employers and those people that own things like nuclear plants and companies are making decisions far away from Canada. I was just talking to the mayor of Hearst and the union last week in regards to what's happening in Columbia Forest Products, and it relates to what's happening at Bruce. Here you've got a company in the United States that says, listen, every other plant we've got in our system doesn't have a union except for you guys. So we want concessions. And that's the problem, is that we need to find some way to repatriate our economy in some way that we can have some local control. So at the very least, government should not be privatizing our public institutions and allowing people offshore to come and invest and to buy up these institutions. But the second thing is we have to have a strategy that allows workers and communities to retake some of those employers that have been basically for too long taking advantage of us.
It isn't just a question of Bruce Power, although that's a very significant part of this province. The simple reality is that Mike Harris's move to privatize power was bad news, disastrous for Ontario. Because if you don't control your electricity system, let me tell you, the decisions about where you're going to have your homes, your factories, the decisions you're going to make about your energy future are out of your hands. Ontario built its industrial base because we had a publicly owned renewable energy system, Ontario Hydro. That's what started us at the beginning of the 20th century. And right now, if we want to rebuild our economy, we need publicly owned power so that we can set the price, so that it isn't simply a question of market, it's a question of what our social needs are. Because if we are going to develop and keep industry here, we have to set a price that keeps smelters, steel mills, refineries, the whole industrial base in Ontario.
Thank you.
It isn't just Bruce Power.
Privatization is wrong-headed. If you only have to look at what the auditor came before the legislature back in November, the auditor said something that New Democrats have known instinctively for years, that when we privatized the hospitals, when we went to particularly the one in Brampton, the one in North Bay that's being built, when they're privatized, they cost hundreds of millions of dollars more than if they're built with public funds. What is true of the hospitals is also true of the power stations. If we are going to allow them to be built, look, let's be fair about the capitalists. They want to maximize the money they're going to make. Do we let them maximize it on the public purse, or do we say that we can do it for a lesser cost? I am convinced that any government properly motivated with good, sound background and people who know what they're doing can do it cheaper than any private company in this country. Absolutely. When I get a chance in a minute, I'll talk to you what happened when I was mayor, because it's a classic example of how private ends up being more expensive.
Thank you.
I don't disagree with any of my colleagues. In fact, one of the biggest shames of Ontario was when Mike Harris was so free with the deregulation and privatization of our hydro system. Yeah. And we're suffering the results of that right now. We are suffering the results of that right now. And the fearful thing is that even if we became government, if you just look at what happened with the 407, they put, they put ironclad contracts in place that can't be taken apart. And I'm sure it's the same in terms of the deregulation of the hydro system. And so we have a real challenge in front of us. And it's just so shameful that Harris destroyed our opportunity as a province to be able to deal with the pricing and the distribution of hydro in a way that maintains jobs, in a way that sustains communities, in a way that makes people be able to have a decent quality of life in our community. Not the people on Bay Street, but the people who live in London, the people who live in Hamilton, the people who work in Thunder Bay, the people who are miners in Northern Ontario. And so we definitely have to look at what can be done, but I'm telling you, I'm very, very fearful that there won't be much to be able to be done, because Harris did a pretty nasty job on 407.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Harris did do a nasty job, but Harris is gone. And Dalton McGuinty has decided that he liked that job and continued doing it. You look around the world, you look at the UK, their health system is being bled dry by P3s. Even a magazine as right-wing as The Economist says this has to end. Well, it isn't just in power. You're right. It's in transportation. It's in healthcare. We have had the neoconservative agenda exposed globally in the last half year. It is an agenda that leads to bankruptcy. It is an agenda that leads to loss of sovereignty and control of our society. And we are the party that can actually talk about the public sector and its promise for this province. We're the party that has to make that argument. When I was on Toronto City Council, I fought against Enron that tried to take over a utility downtown. And in the course of that fight, and I won, in the course of that fight, you realized how badly the American electrical system had been deformed by the fact that it was privately run. We have a tremendous asset here. We have to hold on to it, and we can't let any more go under Dalton McGuinty's watch.
The classic case for me as mayor was my council went against my wishes and privatized half the garbage collection. So in the first year of the half, the privatized one, they underbid a whole bunch, and they got it, and they were cheaper. But the unions and the management sat down, and they went and they did the same things. They bought bigger trucks. They went to a 40-hour work week, 10 4-hour days. They redid the routes. Second year, they were both the same. The third year, Laidlaw was more expensive. The fourth year, Laidlaw sold it to WMI because they weren't making any money. And the fifth year, when the contract was up, and the City of Toronto, because we were then amalgamated, tried to contract, not one garbage collection agency could compete with the public employees of the City of Toronto. That's exactly what happens. We need to have the incentive, we need to have the ability to look at what we need to do, and then we can do it cheaper in the public sector.
We had the same experience in Hamilton. In fact, one of our big problems in Hamilton was our SWARU, our solid waste reduction unit. And that was an incinerator. That's an incinerator. And we had privatized the operation of that incinerator, unfortunately, far before I was on council. By the end of its life cycle, that incinerator was the worst spewer of dioxins in all of Canada. And we managed to close it. When I was on council, myself and a couple of other councillors took up the mantle, and we closed that SWARU. Caused us a problem in terms of the lifespan of our landfill site. But then I chaired the implementation of our kitchen waste program, our organics program, getting those organics out of landfill. And that helped in terms of expansion of the life of the landfill. But one of the things that happened with SWARU is that over the life of the contract, there was this clause in the contract that said any maintenance that was over $10,000 in value, the municipality would be responsible for that. And anything under $10,000, then the operators would be responsible for that. Well, guess what happened? It's the whole thing, a stitch in time saves 9. They didn't do any stitches in time. They saved up those stitches, and they let that plant fall apart. And that's why it was spewing dioxin. And every time it came to where it was a little bit over $10,000 that repairs needed to be put in, it went on the taxpayer, not on the private company. P3s don't work, privatization doesn't work, and we need to provide these services by government, absolutely.
Let me do a quick poll. How many people think it's a bad idea to privatize? Put up your hand. We all agreed, enough said. Thank you.